Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Align, where we help you align with your true self, others, and your desired outcome to live your best life. So today we have a very near and dear topic to both of us. Obviously, given all the social unrest and things that we've been seeing, a lot of violence around Asian Americans and their experience, I thought who else better to bring on than Stephen to talk about this topic. And one thing the audience doesn't know is Stephen loves to play devil's advocate with me. So he always tries to find the other side. So I think this will be a very interesting episode because I feel like he's just going to find another way to get at me. So it can either be very contentious or
your podcast. It's your podcast. So.
Right. No. I want it to be like us just talking, right? So that's the warning to the audience. We don't know how it's going to play out. So we'll see how it goes. All right. You ready, Stephen?
I'm ready.
Okay. So you made a good point, right? And initially I wanted to talk about Asian American experience, and you made a good point saying it's a loaded term, the term Asian American. So talk a little bit more about that. How is it loaded?
Well, I think the issue I have, whether it be in a professional setting or a social setting, or reflecting on my childhood, or reflecting on my adulthood, is Asian just. First of all, Asian means so many different things. And Asian American just adds a whole nother series of dimensions because, when you and your family came to this country is probably a more primordial experience than just the color of your skin or the color of your hair or whatever. I think, one of the interesting things when I got my vaccination, they asked me what my race was, and they asked me what my ethnicity was. And I never really thought about what's the fucking difference, right? And I realized that's one of the weird things about being Asian. Like, for me, culturally, ethnically, I'm Asian. It's because I share certain values with other people from countries like mine. And that's where one, big definition of, well, what do you mean by Asia? Do you include India and Pakistan? Do you include Thailand and Vietnam, South Asia, Southeast Asia? So again, I don't know if I share those ethnic and cultural values as, I kind of tend to mean East Asian, and specifically I mean Chinese, but that's not necessarily the same culture. And it's a culture from another country. So my ethnicity is Chinese, but when you really look at it, race is supposed to be, well, what do you share with other people that people are drawing conclusions based on the way you look? And that's really where all the Asian violence and all the things people are talking about stopping. And again, I think people, unequivocally, reject violence against a certain look or type, but I'm not sure if that, is it are we only talking about racial Asians? And then again, whether you came sooner or later. So I think, through my life, I've sort of struggled with, well, I love to rep my set, but which set am I repping? Am I just taking the good, the ones crazy rich Asians that make money, or am I just repping people who are Asian rappers or K-pop, or what am I or am I repping the people who are in Chinatown and don't speak English and run your local dry cleaner, and you have to kind of rep them all, and and so I think. That is one of the challenges. Do I even belong to this set? That's going to kind of run through all of my answers. And rather than go into a wonky political discourse, I'm just sort of saying I'm probably going to be self-contradictory while we talk about this stuff.
Of course, and I'm glad you caveat that you're Chinese. You're technically Taiwanese.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Chinese, but I'm technically Hong Kongese, right? So through the air there, so everyone knows what kind of Asian are we, right? But we do share the commonality of Chinese values, for start. And adding to your point, it's like saying, oh, how do you define Europeans?
Yeah.
Dude, how many countries are there? You know what I mean? That's why it's such a loaded term, Asian Americans, because the Asian part is already complicated enough. And then you throw into your point, the Asian American, when did you become American, right? Are you first generation? Are you fourth? There's so much nuance behind it. So, which is why I do resonate with that, where sometimes I don't know which group am I repping for?
Well, it's strange because, people ask me, what are you? And my answer is unequivocally Chinese. Yeah. And I'm extremely proud to be Chinese. I also happen to think China is, really one of the now accepted, and I've been saying for decades, most dangerous countries and largest enemy of this country. And I'm a proud American. Like, I'm absolutely American. And like, even that now, I don't know how to answer. When people, what are you? It's like, I'm cautious to say Chinese because I'm not a China sympathizer.
Yeah.
I'm of Chinese descent, and so even that is complicated. And you wonder how this country over 5,000 years has been able to have its people be in every country in the world and still call themselves Chinese. That's staggering and amazing.
I agree.
And something to be proud of. So anyway.
No, I agree with you. And we'll dabble back into that. I want to come back to your point about like, what am I, what can I even say? But I do want to start off with, people don't really, a lot of people don't understand. Let's be more specific, like the Chinese, Korean, Japanese culture. I would say mostly all types of Asian, where put your head down, don't cause any trouble. If anyone hits you, you're not calling the police. You just put your head down and you wipe it off and you don't bother with anything. I don't know if it's because you're coming up from, for example, China is communist state, right? I don't know if it's because, for decades and years and generations, we grew up in that setting and that's what we kind of instill values in. I don't know why, but it is true where, for example, even if you have legitimate violent cases, a lot of older adults, our grandparents, are not comfortable coming out talking about it, right? And there's this myth of, oh, well, Asians are the minorities that have made it, right? They're always the one that are so successful, they're well off, they're smart, all this stuff. And I want to be clear, that's a myth, because we've done our part in blending in, doesn't mean that we don't experience racism. So Stephen, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, so like in your preamble, I'm going to take sort of some issue with what you said, and I think the thing about the meek or the model minority, it comes from something very specific, and I say this partially in jest, but partially in experience to all the Korean brothers that I hung out with through my time. I don't know any of those guys who were quiet or calm or peace loving. I've gotten in more fights with Koreans that I didn't need to even be involved with than any white guy. So I don't know where that comes from. I think it's a different thing. I think the model minority comes from, it's an immigrant culture. I mean, it's a diaspora. In this country, in America, there's every year a whole bunch of East Asian immigrants. And when you're an immigrant, you are a model minority. Doesn't matter if you're Asian or Indian or Nigerian. When you come to a new country, your instinct is not to reject the laws of that country. Your instinct is to, well, I'm trying this new place out. I'm trying to make it. Okay. So, and then when you say, hey, Asian success, is that why we're the model minority? We're meek because we want to be more successful and assimilate. Again, I think that's really immigrants want to be the model minority. And again, we seem to forget, like, we live in New York City. I mean, Chinatown is full of Chinese people who are not wildly successful. They have their small businesses, they're doing great, they're doing better than they were at home, they're very happy to be in this country. But damned if they're the ones that everyone goes, that's what we're aspiring to be. So I think that even the implication that the kind of conversation of the model minority is almost imposed on us, because again, I don't think there's anything naturally passive about, maybe you can look at Buddhist religion or whatever, but as I said, I in history as a country, the Japanese were some of the most aggressive in the world ever. So is that a model minority? I don't know. It's in this country, the continuous wave of immigrants, we have first generation Chinese now, and we had first generation Chinese in the 1930s. There's always this immigrant culture that dominates kind of the conversation, and those are almost of any race going to be a model minority. So it's not that when I say reject it, I don't know if that's put on us or we put it on ourselves, or if it's even fair or even right.
Yeah, and I do, you're totally right. And I want to clarify though, when I say more meek and submissive, whatnot. It is like our parents or grandparents, right? I agree with you. I mean, you and I are pretty out there, and I feel like I have a lot of very out there Asian American friends. I feel like the younger generation have learned to kind of step up and be more vocal about it, which is like, I feel like why a lot of things that we've been seeing recently are being more viral. But do you think, like, would you agree at least like your grandparents, your parents, like they're not as out there as us?
Well, so my grandparents came with the revolution to Taiwan. So no, they were far from meek. Now my parents were probably quiet because they were immigrants,
Yeah.
right? Like, so again, I think you're going into sort of some of the problematic when you're trying to ascribe, symptoms or whatever, or characteristics. You don't know what to
Yeah.
ascribe it to. Is it because they're Asian or because they're immigrants? Because again, my grandparents were not immigrants. My grandparents were, well, they were immigrants, but they left China. They fled China to start a country. And they were far from meek. They were nation builders. My father was part of Chiang Kai-shek's cabinet. So it's like, I don't know, you wouldn't call him meek. My grandmother flew fighter jets, and she was like she was like Mulan. She disguised herself as a man to fight in the war. So I don't know. That's not
True Mulan. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's not anything particularly meek about her or her culture or anyone of her generation. But again, maybe that's because they were revolutionaries. Well, not revolution, but they were reacting to a revolution at home. So I just hesitate. It's not that I don't see what you're saying, or it's not that I don't understand what you're saying, but I wonder if it's like a misapplication of characteristics to race. Maybe it's an application of characteristics to situation. Do you know what I mean?
No, that's a fair point, which is again adding more to our initial point that it is such a loaded statement.
Yep.
Right. And I think what anyone is kind of trying to do right now is trying to figure out like pinpoint. And to your point, you can't really pinpoint because every experience is so different. Right.
Yep.
One thing I feel like, for example, I have a lot of people coming up to me after the recent events, just honestly in shock. Like they never even thought Asians were bullied against. They never even thought violence happened against Asian. And I can only speak from my personal experience. When I was younger and things happened to me, I just didn't want to be identified with it. So I just like blocked it from my memory. I would just be like, Jess, this is not something that you should be focused on. You focus on building your life, your career, like whatever you're passionate about. People will be people, and just in a way, don't make a scene, right? So, I think like, for example, a lot of my friends are very surprised to hear that. They're like, similar to you, we're tall, right? We have a certain build. We're not easily, pushed around. We're pretty like out there and vocal. And you would think someone like us two would have never experienced racism or bullied and whatnot, right? I just want to be very frank and upfront about it, that it does happen. It has happened. I would say more now that we're more older and mature, but like my childhood was completely defined by that. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a couple of layers of that. And what's interesting to me about kids growing up now is, we started this with, China is the really, articulated enemy of the US today.
Mhm.
And so there's a sort of geopolitical macro element. If you were to make a movie today, it would be completely non-controversial to make the bad guy a Chinese person, because that is the bad guy in the world as it relates to an American today. It wouldn't offend me at all, because that's like the national sentiment. And what's interesting for me is it echoes, an element of sort of what, let's call it, I don't want to call it justified racism, but like, bias, sort of jingoistic bias. Because I grew up in the 70s and 80s when Japan was like taking over all our factories and our buildings, and everyone, there was like a general bias against people who look Japanese. Now, I'm not Japanese. So when you say, did you want to hide from being Asian? Fuck yeah, because it's like, yo, I'm not even Japanese, like, why are you so mad at me? Right. And like, looking back on it and looking at, now I go, I understand people are losing their jobs to the Chinese, and at that time to the Japanese. And again, I don't condone violence, and I don't think it's justified. I'm just saying, I know where it comes from. Now that's slightly different. There's another overlay here is when kids get bullied because they look different, that's going to happen through time. regardless of who our enemies are.
Yeah.
So, when we got into the late 80s, I was bullied for being Asian. It wasn't because I looked Japanese, because, it's like, well, our enemy was Russia at that time, right? So it's like, okay, well, you can't use this geopolitical argument. It was just because I look different. And if you look different, like, when you're growing up, it's like the tyranny of the majority, right? It's the problem with democracy. It's like, well, we're all, ABC and you're not, so that's the weak one, right? And it's sort of harder to see now in New York. It's not because New York, is so woke. It's more just like it's a very diverse society, and what's interesting to me is when I was growing up and I would go to Taiwan and I would talk in other countries in the world, but particularly in Asia, it's almost amazing that they're amazed there aren't race riots in America every day, because like different races live in such close proximity to each other. Like in China, everyone looks Chinese. Surprise. It's only in this country that like this is such a, it's such a topic, and it should be, because it's like a grand experiment. And I would argue we're maybe not doing a great job right now, but it kind of goes up and down, but it is an experiment, because if you go to Italy, everyone's Italian. Okay. So this concept of we started with, which is Asian, what does that mean? Do you mean a certain country in Asia? Do you mean, and then Asian American, we're all jammed into America like that, it's just it's as a race, we all look the same, but this is when you add the nationalistic element, it's almost this country in some ways, I'm so proud to be here. I'm not trying to, again, condone violence or race. It's hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People will always point to difference when they have dissatisfaction. Yeah. Right? That's the first thing you do, is point to difference and single out people that are different from you. And you can call that bullying, but that's almost like human nature. It's self-justification. Yeah. Right. So again, I don't know where to come out on it, but there's just a lot of things at play, and it's just weird for me because they're back in play now in a way that I really haven't even felt since I was a kid. Yeah. And all of a sudden I'm like, I kind of, I see why you hate the Chinese. Like, I gotcha, peace, like stop anti-Asian, hate, but I kind of get where some of it comes from. And then, but not what the outcomes are or where other it comes from. So yeah, not really an answer, but just sort of an observation. Right?
No, I mean, you make a good point, because obviously you're hitting on some deep-seated human instincts that we're never going to get rid of, right? And it's just a matter of being mindful of it, understanding it, right? I think it's obviously way easier now that we're adults looking back, but I mean, your childhood was your everything, right? It completely defines you. Like, yeah. I wouldn't be high charging in the way I am today if I didn't go through what I went through.
100%.
Like, do you know what I mean? And so, in what ways has being bullied or being seen as different actually helped you in your career?
Look, that's a fascinating comment, because when I was growing up, it was always like, should America be sort of considered a melting pot, which was the word of the day, or a mixing bowl? And is the idea for us to all get along and be American, or us to be all distinctly different but share being American, right? And in some ways, there's different major cities in the world where there's different versions of this. Like, you can look at LA and say, well, in LA, you don't even need to speak English, okay? And actually in my day, when I was growing up, it was like, that was the thing, is should we make it a law that you have to speak English if you want to be a citizen? And that's a tough law. Like, I mean, that's a kind of a tough question, because should we print all the street signs in every possible language? Well, I'm not sure that's reasonable either. Right. So I guess, we should sort of celebrate and accept difference, just as much as we're trying to stop conflict around difference, right? And so, in my personal experience now, I found I flip it around. It's kind of like, until I started calling like white people, there was no power in being Chinese or Asian or different. But I just started being like, well, how would you understand? You're white. Like, you know, like I walk into a room, everyone assumes I'm smart. You're white. How would you understand that? And like, I say that as a joke to be funny, but this is the point. There can be pros and cons to your difference. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, you will be different, and that will draw you some conflict. And can we mitigate and understand and discuss where that conflict comes from? Not eradicate it, because I don't think that's possible.
I agree.
But then can you take the pros too and go, man, I'm just different. We're just, gonna be whatever, better dressed, better at math, better at whatever. Again, I'm joking to take the positive stereotypes because that's what it is. Let's accept difference. Okay.
Right.
There will be conflict. Let's understand the conflicts, but we're not trying to eradicate conflict. I don't think we're just trying to have like it not be a violent outcome.
100%. Yep, I hear you. How do you think Asian Americans can better support each other?
I that's a great question. I think this is empowering each other comes from a couple of things, in my view. One is just existing in areas where you didn't think it could exist.
Yep.
And showing others that look like you that it can be done.
Yep.
Okay. So when I was coming up, it was Wall Street. Well, okay, there's plenty of Asians on Wall Street now. Now it's probably media. And frankly, media has had Asian women in there for a long time, but what about Asian men?
Yeah.
It just show that it can be done. What about professional sports? What about, so Jeremy Lin, like, why do I rep check? Because it's like, it's to show that you could be whatever you want.
Yeah.
Just because you don't see a lot of them doesn't necessarily mean there's like intentional lockout of your kind. There may be some unintentional, there may be intentional, but just showing that you can, makes a difference. And I think so that's one way to support each other is those who are showing up in kind of places, non-traditional places, is to celebrate and point it out. Like, that's awesome. You know what I mean? I'll cheer for that team just because there's an Asian dude on. Like, so that's one. But I think the other is you have to, you've got to take the pros with the cons. And for all the talk that we have about it's unfair that, scientists are, being shaken down like it's communist China because they might be spies, like we can move for those movements, and I think they're important. But I think it's equally important to go to, again, really what I think divides our country more than anything is social class. And it's like, well, what about the hardworking, non-English speaking, 5-job having Asians in Queens or in Chinatown or in whatever? It's like, how can you go? And again, I'm stereotyping because Queens is actually really quite nice now. But I'm just saying, it's like your responsibility is to go help those that need help. Okay, it's not just advocating. It's, hey, not just showing I can be this, you can be this too, but like, how do you say, hey, if we're going to talk about education programs for all, why don't I focus on education programs for my people, for those who look like me, for those who don't have that available, and why not, concentrate your efforts locally? And when I say locally, I don't mean just around you, but within the tribe that you're getting the sort of larger political benefits for. You've got to help people who need the help, the most. I point to one, quick example. I remember we were hiring. I used to work at a big bank, and we were hiring, and I had an Asian analyst, and we were interviewing all these people together, and it came down to like, some white guy and some Asian guy, and they were equally good. And yet, like, my analyst was kind of like harder on the Asian guy, and I didn't know whether that came from competition. He didn't want another Asian guy, or I didn't know whether it was because he wanted more out of someone who looked like him so that it would, raise our profile. I don't know what the reason is. Uh, but it was like, if you can't stand up then everything else you're doing is just talk.
Yep.
Right? So yeah, maybe they're equally, and maybe you chose him because he's Asian. Okay, yep. That's why I chose him. You know what I mean? And it's like, and I think that, you have to be mindful of things like that, is not just, hey, how does the broader movements help yourself? But it's like, how does it specifically, locally, in this moment in time, help somebody else?
Yep.
That's, meant to be in your tribe. So,
Yep.
so I'm hoping that we can all remember to do that.
No, 100%. And I think that's why I've been very touched through social media that people who are comfortable using their platform, using their voice, like there's so many programs. Like I'm sure you saw, there's this awesome woman who essentially raised, I don't know how much money, a couple hundreds of thousands of dollars for like taxis. So the grandparents can get reimbursements, like things like that. I was just so like, honestly, just so touched that people are coming together. It's not just Asians helping each other. It's like everybody, right? But
Yeah.
at the point, like it is very easy to put things into action now with social media. Like you don't have to physically leave.
100%. You're going to get, for good and bad, you're going to get publicity for it. Well, it's like the woman who got attacked and the GoFundMe raised all this money. And she's like, okay, it's not that she doesn't need the money. She's not like wealthy.
Yeah.
Okay. But that she paid it on and gave the money, to others who needed help. Not only is that the sentiment that's incredibly admirable, but that sentiment should be, to your point, publicized and talked about. And it's like, listen, that's doing, okay? No, let's not just talk about it. Like, let's set examples for each other and actually follow those examples.
Yeah. And to your point about more like fiery Asians I was like, that is an ultra Chinese grandma. Like,
yeah, cool. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then how about, my final question is, how can non-Asian Americans better support Asian Americans?
Look, I have to be careful with this because, my instinct is like, look, man, we don't need your help. Okay. Right?
All right.
But that's not exactly what I mean. That's an attitude. Okay. What I mean is, hey, let's all talk to each other about these things. What do you resent? What do you not resent? Tell me what annoys you. Do you find it annoying that, your ex-boyfriend only dates Asian girls now? Do you find it like, let's just talk about that. Okay. Let's just be real about it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's a thing though. It is a thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, if that pisses you off, let's be real about it. Like, you don't have to go, well, that's, so wonderful. I kind of rather know. And so I don't think this is just non-Asians to Asians. I think this is, again, going back to what we were saying, when we say celebrate difference, embrace difference, embrace conflict. It's like, hey, what is it you don't, what is it you see?
Yeah.
What is it that bothers you? Because again, we may not solve it, but I think if we're aware, sometimes you're just not aware of the impressions you're making, and maybe the response to it is completely unfair, but if you're not even aware of it, then we'll never make progress. So I don't know that people need to do anything for us. I think what we need to do is just be more open about everything.
Yeah.
Not just things we admire in each other, but things we resent in each other, and be like, well, why is it, blah. And again, I think that would cause some uncomfortable times, but through uncomfortable times come uncomfortable conversations, and through some conversations comes a little more understanding.
Right.
I don't need you to, always consider my perspective. That's actually not what I'm asking for. I'd like to know your perspective. You know what I mean?
Right. No, that's so true. Yeah, because my dad always says this to me, and that's a really good point, where you actually want to hear someone who's the polar opposite of you, and the way that they think about things, where they're coming from, because you want to see if there's holes in your thesis,
Yeah.
right? And how can are you really, like, you can't always be right, and oftentimes it's always opinion, right? And if you don't have the EQ to accept someone else's opinion, that's on you. I mean, certain things there is just basic humanities, right? Like to your point, violence is violence. We don't want to
unequivocal. Let's just start with, let's not do that.
yes.
Right?
But then beyond that, like every person's experience, like maybe they had, to your point, they have something against this type of person because of their personal past, and you have to be open. I think adding to your point, not only asking people, what do you resent? And us as Asians getting to know the other perspective. I was also very, again, really touched when people came to me and said like, hey, just, I really don't mean to be ignorant, but I'm white, I'm Latin, I'm whatever, and I don't know what it's like. Can you tell me? And I think like being able to educate people on that has been very helpful, where now people are more mindful when we walk on the street, right? They're looking at making sure like no little grandparents are being, hit on, right? Or nothing violence happening. So I think just opening people's eyes up to what is actually happening and not being angry, like being like, you should learn this on your own. I hate that when people have that mindset of saying, well, it's not my job to explain it to you.
Yeah.
It kind of is.
Look, like you just don't want to drive resentment
Yes.
underground, because that's where it sort of festers and breeds more resentment.
Yep.
During again, we've had a number of periods of racial conflict that at least I've lived through.
Yeah.
And during like LA riots, it was like, when the black guys were telling the Asian people in the store, like, why the fuck do you follow me around the store? It's like, okay, well, the answer is, I thought, oh, well, we live in this black community and that's who steals from us. It's like, yeah, that doesn't mean I steal. It's like, look, that doesn't solve, nobody solved anything through that conversation.
Yeah.
But it like brings it out, right? And then everyone kind of looks at each other, well, that's kind of true. Like, it's like, I got you. I don't agree with it and it's fucked up. Don't do that. But do you know what I mean? It's like, you don't want to drive it underground where, everyone is in their own tribe and just talking about, well, those guys always follow you around the store. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Or those guys always do. So like, it's like, well, let's argue about it. And again, I don't know that you solve it, but if it's sort of all out in the open, we can at least learn to deal with each other, deal around it.
Right. I'm 100% with you. We can't ever end conflict, and in a way, we kind of want conflict because that pokes.
I'd rather see it and de-escalate it.
Yes.
Even if we can't solve it, right?
Right. No, super helpful. I always ask. So I always think every single person has a gift, a unique gift, right? What do you think, Stephen, is your unique gift to the world?
My gift to the world. I'm not sure I have that much to give. Except,
don't be so humble. Just what is a trait? What is something that you have?
I think, I think I have, I can set an example of like, we can all be whoever we want to be. And I fundamentally believe that, and I'm just living my life that way. Yeah. And that's my gift. I can tell you that you can be whoever you want to be, or I can go, just look at what I'm doing. Okay. It's like, I think I haven't always been this way, and so maybe the real gift was I was able to change, you know what I mean? Okay. But yeah, it's like, for me, it's, I'm living exactly the way I want to live. And that doesn't mean it's always good. And that doesn't mean everyone likes me. But I think we should all live exactly how we want. You know what I mean? And if we're doing that, I think we'll focus a lot less on conflict. Okay, we'll stay away from people who have conflict, and we'll just do the things we want to do. You know what I mean? And again, that's a privilege in a lot of ways. Not everyone can say they're able to do that. But I'm just kind of the belief that but you actually can.
Yep, I'm with you.
It's hard, but that you actually can be who you ever want to be, whoever you want to be.
Yeah. And I honestly have to agree with you and say that's why I enjoy our interactions so much and every time with you, because we will argue, right? There are a lot of times we do not agree at all, but right. But there's I think it's also a mutual respect where Like, I want to hear the other side. And I know, and the reason why I feel comfortable around you, because I know you were speaking exactly how you feel.
But
And you know, from me, I'm telling you exactly how I feel,
you
right?
know, you hit it on the head, and I think it feeds back into everything we just talked about.
Mhm.
Conflict, openness, all those things come from a place of respect. I believe and value that you have an opinion. I may completely disagree with your opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, but the ultimate respect I can give you is to hear you out.
Yeah.
And argue with you and tell you, well, okay, but look, from my perspective, it's this. But that's the ultimate respect, is
Yeah.
that, hey, both matter.
Yeah. The
You
conversation.
know what I mean? They should both be heard.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you, Stephen,
Thank
so
you.
much for opening up.
Awesome. It was great. It was great doing it. I love what you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll see you soon.
I'll see you soon.
Bye, dear.
Take care. Bye bye.